Welcome to the 86th episode of the Hail Married podcast. I'm A. Toves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're back to recap our gut-wrenching loss to ECU. Let's get started. Before we get into the thoughts on the game, let's talk about our trip to Greenville, since we were there live and in person for this game.
Sure. I mean, we thought Hurricane Helene was going to potentially impact us at first. It was early in the week. We thought, there might be some issues. Turns out there wasn't. We actually flew out of Austin because it was a direct flight from Austin to Raleigh. We had been to North Carolina before, but I hadn't actually stepped out from the airport. So,
Yeah.
And it had been Charlotte. So it wasn't like, obviously a different area. And Charlotte was impacted some by the hurricane. So,
it was an easy flight from Austin to Raleigh. So, it was actually a lot more convenient than I think I expected the trip to be when I was, considering us going and trying to look and make some travel arrangements. It really was a much easier trip than I think a lot of fans probably anticipated it would be. So hopefully in 2 years, if we go back, maybe we'll see some more UTSA fans go to this location, since really there weren't that many people there.
There really weren't. And, honestly, like I said, we flew into Raleigh, we rented a car, drove out to Greenville. It was evening
Yeah.
when we landed. So it's a little dark on the way over there, but it's one of the funny things about being in a different state is just how they handle highways, because in Texas you have just a large amount of access roads to go along with your highway.
Yeah. The concept of a frontage road does not really extend in most of the country.
Right. And the reason I'm saying this is because, so we're driving and it's just like 2-3 lane highway, on either side. And after having been having some rain and essentially I think there was a tornado north of where Greenville is. I was wondering, is there gonna be a mess on the highways? And because there is no frontage roads, there is no way to kind of, potentially divert yourself somewhere else. I mean, it's just, that's a highway. So, long story short, we got to Greenville safe. It's a nice hotel. We met a lot of friendly people. ECU fans were terrific. And there was some good food, good barbecue.
Yeah, it was nice to get to try a different style of North Carolina barbecue.
Yeah, I mean, this is whole hog barbecue, so it's not what we as Texans see it as.
Yeah.
And it's actually kind of interesting that one of the waiters that we had, actually both days for breakfast at the hotel, mentioned that he was actually from New Braunfels, but then spent 10 years in the RGV. And he said, yeah, it was a culture shock because he got his first barbecue sandwich and he's like, this isn't barbecue. This is pulled pork.
They don't call it pulled pork. They
Right.
call it barbecue, and it is pulled pork. But being a native Iowan, I love myself some pork.
Well,
so
sure.
I thought it was great. It was also interesting because we ended up staying at the team hotel that ECU is at. I don't know what it is about us, but we always end up with the opposing team at the hotel.
Even more interesting is we went down for dinner after we checked in, and who do we see right away as we're walking down the hall?
Mike
Houston.
Yeah.
You were like, oh, we should have tripped him, and I was just gonna go to him and just kind of, be nice and talk to him. He acknowledged us. I think he saw your shirt, that it was the home field UTSA shirt you had on, so he realized these aren't ECU fans, but cool to see. It seemed like he was like, it's good to see some UTSA fans, right? But
in hindsight, we should have pulled the fire alarm a couple of times at night, but we did not, sadly.
Yeah. Moving on to actually the game and actually the stadium, I thought it was a beautiful stadium. It was a stadium atmosphere that you usually see in P5 atmospheres, or P5 schools, but it was at a G5 school. And I thought, add to what we just talked about as the trip up to Greenville. And I thought it was great. I thought it exceeded my expectations. I don't know that I necessarily had very high expectations, but we've been to several G5 schools. We've been, and I'll just pick on Rice and North Texas real quick, and nobody shows up to the games.
Yeah.
Yet here at Greenville, their entire home side was pretty much filled.
Yeah, it was packed. Granted, it was also Parents' Weekend, but they still have a really strong attendance. You know, even last season when they were really, really not playing well, they still had a great attendance. And, you know, again, I think it's one of those environments where if more fans from UTSA are willing to make the trip in the future, you know, it could be one of those really great environments where, you know, the UTSA fans could really help to, you know, bring some additional support to the team and kind of get them energized and excited because, you know, the guys kept coming over to us, you know, when they did have a great play and there's like 15 of us, you know, trying to get them all riled up, you know, and so it would have been nice to see more fans there. And I think it could be a really exciting environment, you know, in the future if we do see more people travel.
Yeah, and you know, the area we were in was right by a stupid little cannon that they have. It's a little cannon. When I say I mean literally, it's like maybe a foot and a half off the ground.
Yeah, it's much smaller than the one in North Texas, but just as annoying.
I don't like it whatsoever.
No.
On another note, we did sit in front of Oscar Cardenas' parents. We also sat in front of Kamar Missouri's parents. Interesting story was there was a gentleman that was sitting beside me, and he's a little older, and he said, "Yeah, you know, we like to travel to UTSA games. We're UTSA boosters, and we like to come to the games. I mean, this is what we do. You know, this is we're at the age where we just want to travel and see games." And you know, he was mentioning that because he had been asked why he was there. Was he there to see, you know, one of his sons as a player or anything? And he said, no, I'm just a fan. I'm just traveling to see the game. And I just happened to just lean over and tell him, yeah, you know, we've been asked the same question. I just tell him, well, yeah, our boy is that guy over there, that guy. And he's usually like, I pick on Joe Evans and Kamar Missouri. Yeah, I said Kamar Missouri right in front of his parents.
Exactly.
And they started laughing, and I was like, okay, cool. That's not a bad thing. But I mean, I always pick like the biggest kids.
We did not know it was his parents at the time.
Didn't.
It wasn't until later you figured out, like,
yeah.
Oh, okay.
But I picked the big guys because I figure it's going to be funny when they look at me and they're like, really, you have an offensive lineman for a son? I just think it just makes it even more funny. So anyway, that's just a personal thing. But I guess we should start getting to the game.
Yeah. It was a very, very frustrating game. I said going into it in the preview that I was going to pick a UTSA win more with my heart than my head. You know, I knew the outcome was likely that ECU could win this game just given all of our struggles. And unfortunately, that's what we saw.
You know, I said that we couldn't have or force Owen to win this game with his arm, and that's essentially what we had to ask him to do. And we'll talk about it a little bit later, but I think that led to some of the frustrations because you now put him in a position where you're going to go through even more growing pains than you already were going through with him.
Right.
And for me, at least, you know, I also said it. I picked this as a loss in the spring because I knew that this was a tough environment. This was going to be a tough place to play at. Looking back at it, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I think I hit it right on the nose, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back here. It's just
because then you drank the Kool-Aid.
Well, no, it's just that I was hoping that I'd be wrong. I wanted to come on, talk about our great trip, and then just go straight into, I was wrong. I whiffed, guys. And let me tell you where I was wrong, and start going through all these pieces of where UTSA went right, and it just didn't happen. And so I think that was a little bit more the frustrating part, that I was just hoping to be wrong in my prediction.
Yeah, and you know, we talk about the environment a lot and how there were so many fans and it was loud, and that played a lot into those pre-snap penalties that we saw. I mean, there were more penalties in this game than we've seen in any of the other games so far this season. 12 penalties. Fortunately, only 80 yards. We have had more penalty yardage.
Right.
But a lot of that is because we had so many pre-snap penalties. And again, part of that is because of the crowd and the environment that we were in.
Yeah, they were playing the music actually a lot through once like UTSA was ready to snap the ball.
Right.
And the rule is technically that if you're in the hurry up, that they're not supposed to be playing the music at that point. And that goes for the band or just pumping in music, you know, whatever in-game music they have. They were still playing it. Mm-hmm. And look, I'm not saying this as an excuse. I'm just saying that helped factor into that tough environment, like you said. It just, I think it rattled some of our players,
Right.
specifically the offensive line. And like you said, the 12 penalties makes it's just going to kill you every single time if you're trying to win a game. So I will say this afterwards, after the game, we're trying to find a place to eat, and we're just walking around. All sorts of different places are packed. So we end up at the Tex-Mex place, so,
Yeah,
of
certainly
all
not.
places.
Not. Don't judge us. This was not the place that we intended to go. It
Right.
just happened to be the largest restaurant, so there was availability.
Remember, I mean, we're on a college campus, and it's Parents' Weekend, so we could have tried to find a chain, I guess, and that would have been maybe the way to go. But I didn't want to go to a chain. I wanted
Right.
to do something local. You're in North Carolina. Do the local. I could go anytime to name your chain. I'd rather be at a local restaurant, and it wasn't that bad. It was actually pretty good.
Yeah,
Um,
it's pretty decent Tex-Mex for North Carolina.
yeah, yeah. But as we sat at the bar, and as I got up from the bar, the young guy that was sitting next to me, and clearly he was there with his dad at the bar. He looked over at me and he said, "Oh, did you travel from San Antonio?" And I said, "Yeah, it's a tough loss today. Just seeing just how bad we played in spots." And his dad said, "Oh, come on, man. Those are two bad teams playing this afternoon." And I'm just gonna amend it to say there's two bad offensive teams that were out there. So
Yeah.
let's start out and let's talk about the special teams. Look, I didn't think it was spectacular. I mean, there was nothing splashy about them, but there were also really, I mean, there was maybe a minor issue here that we'll talk about in a second. But for the most part, I thought they played well.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, given the challenges that we've seen for Chase Allen over the season, I was pleasantly surprised, by how our special teams played and how he played. When you have the yips or whatever you want to call it, right?
Yeah.
Kind of going into a game, especially a game like this where it was looking more and more like we were probably going to ask him to have to kick several field goals. And that's a lot of pressure on any, kicker, but especially one who struggled and one who we know last week was talking to a sports psychologist. We don't really know exactly what the issues are, but it's a lot of pressure to put on him. And the fact that he made both of those field goals, he looked very comfortable. I thought that was really impressive. I was actually more surprised by the fact that when they announced their triangle toughness winners after the game, that he didn't get recognized. I thought for sure Traylor would recognize him just as a way to continue to boost his confidence and build on that for the rest of the season.
And it's a good point because just last week we talked about the fact that he was at a sports psychologist. So
Yeah.
the expectation would be that he still struggles a little, this week. But to your point, didn't. So
Yeah.
hopefully that's a sign of
We've turned the page.
yeah, that maybe those yips are gone. The only other thing I kind of want to bring up, and this was, actually one of the issues, was the silly holding penalty that Jamel Hardy got on essentially a fair catch on a punt. I mean, those are the types of penalties that drive Coach Traylor nuts.
Mm-hmm.
If he had hair on his head, he would be pulling it out right now because of the fact that it's a fair catch. Like, you're not going to get the return, so why are you holding? But it's those mental lapses that get this team in trouble.
Yeah.
So let's move on to what I think has been probably one of the bright spots throughout the season, and that's the defense.
Yeah.
We'll start with the key to victory, and that was create turnovers early on ECU's drives. We got the score down to 27-20, and on the very first play of that drive, Zay Frazier, he didn't have the angle that I would have hoped for, but he was playing up on the receiver, and he was able to grab a interception. Now, we didn't score, but I think the big thing to take away from here was the fact that they did have some chances to create some turnovers. And we'll talk about Zay here in a little bit, but there was opportunities that this defense created. And while we didn't get every single ball to bounce our way, I still feel better about the fact that this ECU offense could have turned the ball over more, but we could have been in that position to get it, right?
Yeah, I mean, we almost had 3 interceptions if you count Ken Robinson's interception that turned out to be pass interference. And, that looked like you can kind of argue that call back and forth many different ways. But, I think the defense did everything that we asked them to do or expected them to do. Again, unfortunately, we have some other challenges that we'll talk about that led to the outcome of the game. But, I was impressed with how the defense played.
Allowed only 62 yards rushing, and we were talking about Rajay Harris. We couldn't let him get going, and I mean, he had a couple of nice runs, but no big run, nothing that really gashed this defense. So we really kept him under control, and to hold him to 32 yards rushing in the first half, 30 yards rushing in the second half, like I said, 62 yards total. That's a hell of a defensive effort there. Now, via the air. In the first half, 121 yards passing. Second half was 173. Made some mistakes in the second half,
sure,
which did cost us. But let's talk real quick. 15 consecutive games now with a sack for this UTSA defense. There were 2 in this game that we had, and then 15 consecutive games with a turnover, 2 interceptions. Why am I talking those 2 interceptions and put that last? Zay Frazier.
Yeah, just amazing game for Zay Frazier.
I mean, is this his breakout game? Because, man, let me tell you, he looked confident. He looked confident even before he got his first interception.
Right.
And he actually had like 2 other chances at potential interceptions. But, I mean, he did get interfered with on one of them. So, I mean, but again, like Zay was just having a terrific game. And hopefully this continues to boost his confidence because we're going to need him.
Absolutely.
Even more in the next coming weeks. I thought he played incredibly. We also got to mention that Brevin Randall had a really good game. And Martavius French, we kept hearing his name over and over.
It was like every time there was a tackle, a sack, Martavius French. You just kept hearing his name. He was obviously having a great game. Jamal Ligon ended up reaching 301 career tackles with this game. It was still somewhat of a quiet game for him, but Jamal's kind of that player where he's just consistent. He doesn't really, he hasn't had those big splashy tackles. You don't hear his name as much as you do Martavius French, but then you go back and you look at his stats and, that's where the proof is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, congratulations to him. 301 career tackles. He's now second all time, and he's the second Roadrunner to reach 300 tackles in UTSA history. So, look, a lot of good performances, but we have to talk about real quick is those 2 drives in the middle third of the game. And I guess you can call it the middle third, but right before halftime, 8-play drive, 75 yards. You talked about it. It started off with Ken Robinson's defensive pass interference. And there were 3 penalties on that drive, which allowed East Carolina to extend the drive over and allow them the opportunity to get the touchdown, which they did. Jake Garcia goes in on a run. And then we come out of halftime. We go 3 and out. And essentially another drive. 7 plays, 64 yards. I'm not really sure what the pass defense was, but unfortunately this one was on K-Rob as we essentially asked him as a safety to come up on a receiver, and he didn't really he was slow in coming up, and Denver Harris kind of got in his way, and after that, the receiver just took it up the sideline and scored. Yeah. So those 2 plays right there really hurt and really started allowing ECU to gain momentum. And I say that because we were at the game, and the crowd was silent.
Yeah. They were thought, dead. You could tell they thought, okay, here we go again. We're gonna blow this.
Yeah, we had a 3-0 lead at best, and we're still gonna blow it. Like it was. I really thought that they were gonna cave after that, but we just couldn't put them away. And we'll talk about it here in a second with the offense. But I think those backbreaking plays for the defense, after really forcing punt after punt on this bad ECU offense, I don't know. I mean, I feel like the defense did everything they needed to do for us to win the game. Yes, they had mental lapses, and that hurts. But I can't say that even with those 2 drives that we didn't have opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, we needed them to have a pick six or two, but that's a lot to ask.
Right. It
I mean, it's
is.
almost, just asking them to have a perfect game, which isn't realistic.
Yeah. All right, let's get to the offense because
Yeah.
I think we're going to have plenty to talk here. Key to victory. The offensive line needs to give Owen time in the passing game. They did. I mean, simply put, they gave him time. I mean, there were times where the protection did break down, but going back to what you just said, you can't expect the offensive line to be perfect and give him time the entire game. He did, he did have time, but some of the receivers sometimes had issues getting open, and they also had a lot of issues catching the ball. There was a lot of drop passes out there, and then Owen made some mistakes.
Yeah.
Redshirt sophomore quarterback. We know that he's going to make mistakes, and unfortunately, he had some. But looking at the stats in the first half and the second half, we're zooming along. 256 total yards, 185 through the air, 71 rushing. We're actually 5 of 10 on third down, and we held it for 18 and a half minutes. But then the second half came. 200 total yards. We dropped to 101 yards passing, 99 yards rushing. That's when we see the 2 interceptions. We're 2 of 12 on third down. There was a lot of killer plays, but I thought a key early sequence was the third offensive play for UTSA. Robert Henry fumbles at the UTSA 47, and East Carolina turns it into an early field goal. Atov's Mike Houston's ECU offense had it inside the 5-yard line. I believe they were either on the 3 or on the 2-yard line. Fourth down, and he sends the field goal unit on. I thought that was going to be a costly play.
Yeah, and the crowd was not happy.
Oh no! Here we are, like early in the game. They've essentially had I think it was a 3 and out on their first offensive series. We come out and we fumble the ball away, and then they have this nice drive, and we get the boos, and that was surprising. That was very surprising to me. But again, I thought this was reminiscent of 2021 UAB when Bill Clark flinches, and I thought, what is Mike Houston doing? Worst case scenario, you don't get the touchdown. You pin UTSA inside 5-yard line. They just fumbled the ball away to you on their third offensive play. Make them go the distance.
Right.
So, unfortunately, that just, they kick the field goal, and then we come back and we return the favor, get a field goal too. But, that could have been probably one of the most interesting plays or sequences in the game.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely had, some of these other things, other errors that we'll talk about not happened. That might have been the difference in the game, and we were expecting it to be a close game.
Right. And so that's what killed me there. But, we do have to talk real quick about the running game. It was somewhat inefficient. I mean, yes, if you look at the stats, 28 rushes for 161 yards from your 3 running backs. But you take out that 66-yard, that big-time 66-yard touchdown run by Brandon High, which I'll talk about Brandon real quick here in a second, and it's 27 rushes for 95 yards, 3.5 yards per carry. The running backs have not been really helping out Owen. A young quarterback, as I said at least a couple of podcast episodes ago, need to get going because the running game is what a young quarterback can lean on, and then it's not as you're not trying to ask him to win games, and that ECU's got a good defense, and we knew they're going to try to stop the run,
right?
But man, we just could not move the pile at times, and Brandon High I thought looked really good, but then at the end of that touchdown run, he kind of got tackled awkwardly, and I saw it live, but I just thought he was just trying to essentially extend for the goal line. So I didn't really think anything of it. But then we don't see him again the rest of the game.
Yeah.
So tough moment there for Brandon High. Hopefully he's okay. But our offensive line suffers a ton of injuries throughout this game.
Again, we have a new starting lineup for the offensive line, again, we have injuries in the offensive line. Again, you see rotation. It's just very, very, very frustrating. I mean, it's frustrating to talk about it every single podcast. I'm sure it's frustrating for Coach Traylor to have to answer these questions every game. But this is just one of those things that as we look at the Traylor era, there is obviously something glaringly wrong with whatever our strategy is with the offensive line, because
Absolutely.
it's not that we haven't had talented kids on the offensive line. We have. One of them's in the NFL right now, but we continue to have injuries every single year. We continue to have problems every single year. So something else is going on and is going wrong that just hasn't been fixed. And it's one of those things that Traylor and his brother, the Traylor brothers, are going to have to figure out, because this is just, a black mark, I guess, on the Traylor era, if you will, because we can't
Agree.
get this figured out.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it also, I mean, they brought up the fact that Corey Godnett, when he went down, the announcer said when we rewatched the game, had to mention, yeah, he's not 100%. He's injured, but he's giving it a go. I clearly whiffed then on the offensive line depth we talked about at the beginning of the year, because for me, I thought we've got some talented guys. We're going to be all right. And yes, some of the depth started getting chipped away at, but we're still trotting out injured offensive linemen. That is not going to help the running game. It's not going to help the passing game. And I mean, it just...
Yeah, it's
the
either...
whole operation. I know that Traylor kind of talked about the special teams operation needing to be kind of, the field goal unit needing to be like rebuilt, or like just look at that whole operation. Then you look at the offense, because the offense, you're trotting out injured guys, and what is the expectation for it to have any sort of rhythm or consistency? You just can't do that.
I mean, Traylor's talked about looking at this on the off season, but obviously he hasn't come up with the answer yet. Is it strength and conditioning? Is it, that they're trying to put the wrong body type and personnel in the wrong style of game?
Yes.
Is it all of the above? Is it, I mean, you could go on, but, clearly this is something that until we figure this out, we're going to continue to struggle this season. And clearly there's not an easy fix. We're on, season 5, and we're talking about the offensive line. So
right. Yeah, I mean, I've always been under the opinion, I guess I should say, as I stuttered through some words, of we've got the wrong body type playing for this offense on the offensive line. And it's not to say that I don't like any of these offensive linemen that we have. It's just I don't think it's really working. So we'll see if it gets fixed. I doubt it will. You called it the Kirk Ferentz 2.0. So I don't think that anything gets changed. But let's go to the wide receivers. I talked about earlier, they had some issues getting some separation. It's a pretty good ECU defense. And I think the bigger problem, though, is them catching passes. Like, there was a lot of drop passes.
Yeah.
I know that Owen wasn't accurate the entire time, but I really felt like there was so many catchable passes and we just didn't make the play. And that was frustrating for me.
Mm-hmm.
What wasn't frustrating for me was Chris Carpenter. I think he's been maligned a lot by a lot of UTSA fans. I thought he was the most consistent wide receiver in the game. I saw him a few times go on some crossing routes. And when I was rewatching the game, I mean, you only see where the quarterback is in the offensive line for the most part from, when you're watching it. But Chris was kind of coming across on some, I would say, some deeper drag routes that were going about 10 yards. And Owen missed him a few times. Now, he did, I think, look for Chris, once or twice, and was able to connect with Chris. And that was effective in hampering this ECU defense. But there was too few far in between. But Chris was, I thought, playing well. I watched him a couple plays, and I thought he ran some crisp routes. I could be wrong. I mean, maybe he's supposed to run a different route, but he looked good running his routes.
The route that he ran looked good.
Yeah. Now, I say that because I also was watching JT, and late in the game, there was a one-on-one set up with JT, and all the UTSA fans, and I can say this with confidence because I could hear it even behind me. They're like, JT's one-on-one with the cornerback. It's going to JT. Sure enough, the ball went to JT. But man, he was laboring just to get
Yeah.
out of his break. I maybe on TV it probably seemed like it was okay, but live, I was watching him run some routes and I watched him get off the line of scrimmage, and his breaks, man, he looked like me. And I'm not saying this at a slight, but I'm like, I got some bad knees. I'm an older dude. He should be much crisper in those breaks, and you can tell that he's just quite not. I don't know how far along he is. I mean, he's far along enough to play, but I
Yeah.
kept telling you, I don't really like the way that he's moving.
Yeah, he clearly still needs to develop some strength, and hopefully he can get back in better form as the season goes on, but it's tough. He hasn't really played in 2 seasons, and he probably is questioning himself and his knee, and I know he's excited to be
Right.
out there again. I don't know that we're ever going to see him exactly like he was before the injury while he's at UTSA, just because this is his last season. But, hopefully he'll feel more comfortable after the bye week and feel like a little bit more like himself in the Rice game.
That would be hopeful. I mean, I think that would be good. But all these issues, the running game sputtering, the offensive line having a bunch of injuries, and continuing to reshuffle, and then kind of leads to some pre-snap penalties, and then you have the receivers who are dropping passes. It really hampers progress for this offense.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about Owen in this game. I think watching him at times, I felt like the game had sped up again for him, and it didn't like slow down. It looked like in the first half like it was slowing down a little bit, and I was like, okay, maybe he's gonna kind of move forward. He'll be okay. But there was a few times, and it was evident too if you're watching it on TV that he had some space to run, and he just didn't take that.
Yeah.
I mentioned to you, it's like early on when Frank would just decide to run, and we're like, no, look upfield, and your receiver's open. It's the opposite with Owen. Owen's like looking at his receivers like, give me one more second, and I'm letting go of this pass, and it's going straight to you, when he should be going either faking like Frank used to do, and then just taking off running,
Right.
and getting that first down or extending
Yeah,
the
and when he
drive.
did run, he just hesitated too long.
Yeah,
And so by the
yeah.
time he finally decided to take off, that they knew that's what he was going to do, or the defenders knew that's what he was going to do.
Absolutely. And then, watching him throw it a few times, yeah, some of his passes were high, but I also felt like some of his feet weren't set at times. And that's just going to kill his accuracy and his throwing power. It just really affected him at times. Now, one of the things on some of those high passes, though, is that Owen was doing it on purpose, because if he puts it any lower, the ball's getting intercepted.
Right.
He made mistakes, 2 interceptions, and they weren't great interceptions. But I still think that, add his, inexperience, his, reticence to run. And I mean, some of these things I think are fixable. It's just going to take time. And,
Yeah.
and I think that overall, I think is the toughest thing for a fan base to look at, because again, and I'm not going to try to rehash this, but we've had a veteran quarterback for the longest time. Now we have a young guy, and all of a sudden it's like, well, what's going on? I know we'll talk about that here in a second, but
Yeah, let's talk about what we learned about the team from this game.
I think it's just been the story from the beginning of the season. It's your offense struggles because of your young quarterback, and then you have a couple of defensive mental lapses, and that just kind of snowballs for UTSA.
Right.
And it kind of, leads to, giving up a few scores, getting behind, having some problems. Honestly, I think to this point, Jess Lepp has done a very good job with the defense. You could nitpick and say, well, I wish he would have done this here. Obviously, the Texas State game got away from him. Well, I mean, the offense really wasn't moving. So
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what you can expect a tired defense in the first half to continue to, keep up the effort the full time. And then Texas, they were just outmatched, but they still played, really hard.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the defensive side, we initially going into the season had concerns about the secondary. And we really have, I mean, yes, there have been some issues in the secondary, but we haven't seen as many issues as I anticipated.
Right.
You know, actually, they have performed better as a unit than I was anticipating. So I've been pleasantly surprised with that.
Yeah, and it's just those, but the ones we remember are those, mental lapses, those
Sure.
few mental lapses that all of a sudden become the narrative as opposed to what should be the story about this UTSA defense. I know this is going to sound controversial, but I have no problems at this point with Justin Burke's play calling. Yeah, rough at times, but for the most part, the plays at ECU were there, and they have been there in various games. What my issue with Justin Burke is that he's essentially the vice president of the offense, and his team's not executing well.
Mm-hmm.
That is my problem, because there's no way you can tell me that they're not having issues on the practice field, because there's no way that you could be really good and practicing and then all of a sudden go to game day and just
mentally fall apart.
Fall apart. That, I mean, I guess it could be, but you're telling me that all 11 are the problem? Like, this, it's just, there's just no way. Obviously it's more than just a quarterback. Now you just need an entire set of skill players and offensive line to help. I don't think that's the case. And one of the things I wanted to bring up to you is the fact that early in his tenure, Jeff Traylor kept talking about perfect play Thursday. I loved it because it was clear that it was the attention to detail that we were missing from the Frank Wilson era.
Mm-hmm.
That opportunity to make sure that whatever you're going to put in the game plan, you better run it well. And if you don't, we're not running it on Saturday. That's it. He was being the adult in the room, right? But then I think he got a little lax, and he doesn't talk about it anymore. So I'm wondering, based on what we've seen, at least from the offense, do you think that that's maybe something that has really crept in?
Yeah, I mean, you certainly wonder whether or not they're still doing this. And if they're still doing it, are they really holding the team to a certain expectation of perfect play that maybe he did in the past? Because it just doesn't seem like that's happening. Either that or you're literally just having complete mental breakdowns in the game. And then if that's the case, maybe the sports psychologist needs to come and talk to the entire offensive, side of the ball. But it makes you wonder, if we've gotten away from that, and maybe if that's something that they should circle back and say, look, this gave us some success in 2020. Maybe it's something we need to go back and, do again.
So in the flight home, I started kind of thinking about, some of the things we would talk about on here. And I realized that I think after Texas State, and really even as early as the second half of the Kennesaw State game, I kind of started feeling like I need to recalibrate my expectations.
Right.
Have you felt the same way? Like, did you feel it back then, or did you, I think more recently, start trying to recalibrate your expectations?
Yeah, I think a little bit at the beginning, but now I feel like, okay, this is probably going to be a lot more like 2020 than what I thought, or more like 2020 than 2023 for sure.
Yeah.
I do think that this season, just from what we've seen so far, instead of going into it with the mindset of, oh, we're going to have 9 wins, it's probably going to be more like a 6 or 7 win season.
Yeah, I don't know that I can go real quick and say, yeah, I think it's going to be 6 or 7 wins. I think it's going to be a slog for some of these. I think for some of these games, I think there's some bad teams, like I said, in AAC. And I think, it'll get interesting to see just how this offense performs. But we also have to remember, this is the third away game that this team has faced. I mean, this is half of their away games have now already been played, and they're going to play their fourth one in Houston after the bye week. So
yeah, I mean, that is the good thing to think about, is we do have the second half of the season in the Dome, where we have historically played better, where the team obviously feels more comfortable. So hopefully that will help. But I do think that this will be one of those seasons where we're getting down to the end of the season trying to figure out, are we going to get to bowl eligibility?
Yeah.
And I fully expect to hear Traylor talk about, let's make it in November to remember, because that's, that's kind of where we're trending, right? We were also joking on the plane about, okay, we're coming up to a bye week. And historically, during the Traylor era, the bye weeks have been filled with drama. So what was going to be the drama of this bye week?
Oh, it's already here. It's right after the game. Owen as the starting quarterback. I mean, there are fans that are out on Owen. And I mean, I guess you can just either look at it via X and seeing all those tweets going out that are like, Owen's not the guy.
Or Facebook.
I mean, wherever you want to look at it. I mean, I saw a few on X and I was like, all right, I'm over it. I think it's perplexing that they're already out on Owen.
Mm-hmm.
This is Owen's 9th start. So let me give you his stats for this game. 24 for 49 for 251 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, 7 rushes for 11 yards. I'm going to compare him to Frank, like we have talked about since the beginning of before the season. Frank's ninth start technically was at home against La Tech in 2020, a 27-26 victory over La Tech. He was 18 for 33 for 189 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 10 rushes for 5 yards. Oh, we don't want to count that one because it depends. Because if you don't want to count the 2019 North Texas game where in the second play of the offensive play of the game, he gets injured and essentially knocked out of the game.
Well,
okay.
Knocked out of the season.
Well, yeah, sure. We can then go forward to the FAU game that was after La Tech. He was 12 for 26, 109 yards passing, 14 rushes for 66 yards rushing.
No touchdowns.
There's no touchdowns. He didn't turn over, but he had a terrible game.
Yeah.
In his 9th starts in those 2 games, whichever one you want to count, Frank was not good at all. I mean, he had below average games for what Frank eventually established as a quarterback. So I got to ask you this. Giving you those stats to remind you of where Frank was at a 9th start, why was he given more latitude or has been given more latitude when he was a young quarterback than Owen has?
I think it's 2 things. One, it's the memories that people had of Frank in high school and the fact that they saw him play in the San Antonio area. They had this notion of what Frank could be and would be. And then more importantly, it's because we were coming off of some very down years in the Wilson era. And we went, we had Frank come in 2019 and then in 2020 with Traylor. And suddenly in 2020, we have hope. We have hope that every time we see a good play from him, that this is going to lead to something good down in the future and that we're going to win more than 4 games. With Owen, we came off of a 9-win season. So we expect that Owen is going to come in and continue what Frank did. I think that's the big difference. You went from the hope with Frank that we could do better to the expectation with Owen that we're going to continue that success. And we have put a weight of expectation on Owen that's just not realistic. And it's certainly not the same way that we looked at Frank.
When hope becomes expectation. It's never good for any fan base, but I think for especially a UTSA one, it's not a great mixture. I mean, I totally get what you're saying. I mean, I agree. I mean, I think it's just the thought of Frank and what he could possibly do. And now Owen's got these expectations, and I think there was just so much talk about, of different things about how good this team should or would be.
Right.
And as much as we've talked about in the offensive area, just all these issues that have crept up on that side of the ball, Frank dealt with a lot of that stuff too in 2020.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'll be the first to admit in 2020, I was the person who was like, oh, Frank's not the guy. Let's bring in Josh Adkins. Let's bring in Lowell Narcisse. And, ultimately, Frank turned into that guy. He turned into a very successful quarterback, particularly in 2022. And I whiffed. I wasn't willing to give Frank that chance back in 2020. So looking at it now, I'm not going to get out. I'm not going to hold Owen to a higher standard. And I'm not going to immediately want to throw him out and replace him, because if I whiffed on Frank, then maybe Owen can match or maybe even exceed what Frank did in the future. But I think it's just a little too early to make that judgment.
I agree with you, because the very first episode that we recorded for this podcast, the biggest thing I threw out there was Frank's not the guy. Frank is not the quarterback for UTSA's future. And I just kept cringing every single time I saw him play, because I was like, I'm tired of him seeing the injuries. I'm tired of seeing, him having issues passing the ball. He's not getting better. He's blah, blah, blah. I'm with you. I whiffed. I'm glad I whiffed.
Right.
I mean, I'm happy to come on here and say I whiffed on Frank. If many of you think that you didn't whiff on Frank, you did. You had doubts too. It's the same doubts that Owen's having, right? That people have for Owen right now. But I think, to your point, I'm not going to give up on Owen. I think that we're in a different era, and sure, I think it'd be easy to cast him aside as well, like you said, but where does that put UTSA?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look, I know the fans are out on Owen, but I guess they're going to all start ponying up that money, that 10 to 20K to go get a quarterback or whatever the money is. Cause that's pretty much what you're looking at. So
we're going to have at least 100,000 plus. I mean, those are the numbers that have been thrown around, right? To get a good quarterback out of the transfer portal.
So who are you going to get out of the transfer portal? You're going to get Jake Garcia, same guy that is at East Carolina. Like, they don't even like him. Like, they don't want anything to do with him. They're like, oh, he blows. Who are you going to get? Matt Sluka, the guy that just quit on UNLV, so we can pay him $100,000 to come to San Antonio, and he quits on UTSA after 4 games too? I mean, yes, you can get a Chandler Morris, but Chandler didn't even follow his dad. His dad's coaching at Texas State, didn't even go there. He could have been Jordan McLeod.
Yeah, nope. I mean, and we talked about Jordan McLeod, right? Texas State fans are so excited to have him this season, and they're only going to have him for 1 season. And right now, Texas State season is not looking the same way it did after that big UTSA win. So, I don't know that we necessarily want to have to discuss a new quarterback every single season either.
No, I don't think we should. And what's going to happen? You get a new quarterback, you bring in a new veteran quarterback, and he struggles. And what are you going to say then, UTSA fans?
Yeah.
We paid really good money for this guy, and he blows. There's a lot of things, I think, at play here, and I get it. I get the frustrations, but Owen's not all the problems. There's some problems in the coaching staff. There's some problems, yes, on the field, but at least for Owen, it's going to take time. So
yeah.
we're either patient or, I mean, like some fans they're already out. So,
well, and those are probably the same fans who were panicking last year that Jeff Traylor was going to leave UTSA for Baylor, Houston, name the job, right? Well, I guess we don't have to worry about that Traylor to Baylor talk every time we lose a game or we don't play that well.
Yeah.
I think it's safe to say that we have Jeff Traylor for next year, and we talked about GJ Kenny. Was he going to be the guy that went to Baylor instead? Well, look at what Texas State has done since the game against UTSA. When GJ said they put all of that effort into winning that game, and I said, bold strategy, Cotton. How's that going to play out for you? Well, they just lost to Sam Houston State. Sam Houston State, people. The school that won 3 games last season in their first FBS year. One of them was Middle Tennessee that they beat.
Kennesaw State.
And then I think La Tech
Yeah.
was the other win. Yeah.
It's rough out there. So before you start saying, let's cast Owen aside, think about it. Like, there are success stories, but they're few and far between.
All right, before we go, let's talk about UTSA soccer.
Our girls, yeah, lost to Memphis 1-0. I don't know what it is about UTSA, but they just seem to give this Memphis team fits.
Yeah.
Memphis was ranked 15th the week before, and then when they played UTSA, were ranked 17th. So whether it's here in San Antonio or whether it's in Memphis, I don't think the Tigers are going to be wanting to see UTSA show up because, they're just giving them fits. I know we lost. It was one defensive lapse. Stop me if you heard that before. And Memphis took advantage, and that handed them the win over the Runners. Tough loss, but I thought the players looked good when they went up against a ranked team. I mean, well, let's call it what it is. It was a very good ranked Memphis Tigers squad. So didn't really get to watch the Sunday game against Rice too much. Really caught the last 20 minutes. I thought they played well in the last 20, but I think over and over, I think you heard me say a few times, those crosses just aren't hitting again.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. I mean, you could hear even from the announcers, that one was close. That one was close. I mean, it just seemed like we had more shots on goal, and we just couldn't get one to go through the net.
Yeah, it was just absolutely tough. I think that they've obviously worked on these things, but it just wasn't working. So hopefully they can tune up some of those crosses, because they're going to be this Thursday, October the 3rd at UNT on ESPN Plus, 7 o'clock. Really need a win here against North Texas. I know it's an away game, but it would really, really help their season out to get another conference win, especially if they're really trying to get into that conference tournament. So,
yeah. UTSA is going to have their second Hall of Fame induction dinner on October 18th at Pedrati's Ranch. The inductees this year include Derek Gervin, Monica Gibbs, Michael Rocket, Starlight Williams, and Teddy Williams. They still have tickets on sale through Monday, October 7th, individual and table tickets if you're interested. This year, for the first year, they'll also be offering an NIL tip-off luncheon to support UTSA basketball. So an event similar to what we've seen the last 2 years for football, this time supporting both men's and women's basketball. Thursday, October 10th at La Cantera. The keynote speaker is Robert Ory. Individual tickets and sponsorships are still available for that as well if you are able to come out during the week to support UTSA's basketball team. And then let's talk a little bit about what else happened in the American this weekend. FAU and Memphis both played out-of-conference games, so I don't know that there's really a lot to talk about there. No. Army beat up on Temple 42-14.
Jeff Monken has Army rolling. That's going to be a tough team to beat.
Tulane beat South Florida 45-10, so kind of interesting. These are two of the other teams that preseason were picked pretty high in conference. To see Tulane beat South Florida by such a high margin, I think was a little surprising.
I guess Golish doesn't have it all figured out there at South Florida, but John Summerall, God, what a awesome coach.
Yeah, I mean, Tulane has got to be really excited that they were able to steal him from Troy.
Yes.
And be able to continue the success that they saw under Willie Fritz.
Absolutely.
North Texas beat Tulsa 52-20. It's kind of surprising to see North Texas with as many wins as they have this season, but I think, as you pointed out, they have been feasting on some bad teams.
They have. I think their best win was against South Alabama. South Alabama romped on Appalachian State after they beat ECU. I gotta tell you, I don't believe in North Texas just yet, because South Alabama is essentially 2-3. Major Applewhite has that team that is a Jekyll and Hyde team. Excuse me. And look, North Texas got beat by a bad Texas Tech team. I mean, they just absolutely got killed in that game. They were they weren't in that. They were in the game like in the first quarter, and then they just got plastered. So I don't know what North Texas is doing, and they're probably getting a little more comfortable with Chandler Morris there, but I don't know. I'm still a question mark there.
Yeah, and then we got to watch a pretty significant portion of Navy and UAB, and Navy just beat up on UAB 41-18.
Just fire Trent Dilfer now. Just fire him, UAB. Just eat the money and just get yourself a real coach.
And then Charlotte beat Rice in a nail biter, 21-20.
Fire both of them. Fire Pogge, fire Bloomgren. We need the AAC to get better, and those two coaches, actually those three coaches that I've now mentioned, need to go. These universities need to pony up their money, and let's get some coaches, guys, because you got to get better than this.
So all in all, I think it's shaping up that it's going to be a three-way race between Army, Navy, and Tulane for that conference championship. And it might come down to Navy versus Tulane on November 16th.
It would really be interesting if you do get. I think Stephen Whitaker has brought this up before, and Army versus Navy in the conference championship game, and then their normal weekend only Army versus Navy, like
out of conference game. Yeah,
that would be a chef's kiss, I think. But I doubt it'll happen. But wow, what a moment for this college football season if it does.
Yeah, again, I think it's really going to come down to that November 16th game. And then one more point on conference realignment.
Are we going somewhere?
Not UTSA, but the dominoes continue to fall. Latest news today was that UTEP is going to go to the Mountain West. Not 100% official, but if the money that's been thrown out there is real, that they would be leaving a deal with Conference USA for about $400,000 in TV money to somewhere closer to $4 million at Mountain West. I mean, that's a huge deal for UTEP.
Good for them. Good for them.
And the even better thing is, if UTEP does make that move, it could open up the potential that Tarleton will finally get to make it to the FBS. They have been very, very strongly pursuing that since 2018, maybe even before that. Really wanted to get into Conference USA before. Judy said no. Today, the news broke that Mountain West might be interested in Tarleton, which would be a much better deal for Tarleton in terms of, monetary deal if they were able to get it. It's a huge leap, but if those of you who haven't listened to me or don't really know that much about Tarleton, if you want to learn more about what they've done and what their administration has done to try to get prepared for this moment, there was a great article that came out today from Corey Hogue. He's a writer for Dave Campbell's Texas Football. Corey covers all of the non-FBS programs. He wrote an article on Tarleton about everything that they have been doing to really get ready for this moment because, again, the administration has been actively pursuing getting into FBS. Making that jump to FCS was for them really just a stepping stone. They've always wanted to be FBS. They have the money. They have the facilities. They're building the additional facilities that they need. So, again, if you want to get kind of up to date on Tarleton, go ahead and check out that article. Will it happen? I don't know, but it's just kind of interesting to think about both of my both of the schools that I graduated from being in FBS programs.
Maybe they can meet up against each other.
Yeah, I don't know how I'd feel about that. So we'll just keep them over in the Mountain West right now. we play enough, soccer, baseball, those other kind of games. I'm not sure that I'm ready yet to see them meet on the gridiron. But I think that about wraps it up for us here at the Hail Married Podcast. Thanks for joining us. I'm A-Toes.
And I'm the Toes.
We'll be back next week to preview our game against Rice.
Birds up.